Um, Moving on. The way that we do this is that we have a framework for the overall well-being of caregivers. The overall well-being of caregivers has 7 elements, which are physiological, psychological, social, life and work purpose, creative expression, financial and legal, and spiritual well-being. Stress is caused when there is an imbalance in the well-being, and unaddressed chronic stress can lead to severe mental health issues. So that's our framework. And in this framework, today we are focusing on financial and legal well-being, legal more than anything. And therefore, we will be talking about living wills so that caregivers can keep this in mind during their caregiving journeys. I would like to welcome Dr. Roop and Dr. Dhwani Mehta, who are here as experts on the subject. A brief introduction about them. Dr. Roop Gurshani, who some of you may know very well, and from the previous webinar as well. He passed his MBBS in 81 and MD in 84 from the Government Medical College, Nagpur. He's a DM in neurology from 88, GMC in JJ Mumbai. He was the head of Department of Neurology at Nair Hospital and TN Medical College from 91 to 94, and honorary associate professor in neurology at GMC and Sir JJ Hospital during 98 to 2012. In addition to clinical neurology, his main interest is in epilepsy and EEG. He is associated with the Epilepsy Clinic on the Lifeline Express. He is the founder trustee of FINE, Forum for India Neurology Education, which organizes teaching courses in neurology. He's on the steering committee of ELICIT, which is the big reason that he's here today, and the interdisciplinary task force of intensivists, palliative care, physicians and neurologists for end-of-life care in India. Welcome, Dr. Roop. Dr. Roop, are you online? Unmute your end.
Yeah, now I'm unmuted. Hi.
Just checking audio.
Yeah.
Check.
All well.
Good to have you here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on, Dr. Dhwani Mehta. Welcome. Good evening. Dhwani, I can't hear you. Could you please check?
Is this fine now? Can you?
Yes, this is slightly better. I'd like the volume to be slightly louder, please.
I think this is as high as it will go.
Okay.
Hopefully this works.
Dr. Dhwani Mehta is the co-founder of the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, an independent think tank that does legal research to make better laws and improve governance for the public good. She has been working on legal and ethical issues related to end-of-life care since 2015. In collaboration with End of Life Care India Task Force, which Dr. Roop is a member of, Vidhi has drafted a model law on end of life care and worked with hospitals like Manipal Group and AIMS to develop the end of life policies. Warm welcome to you, and thank you for taking the time for our session today.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
So I would like to move to some of the admin announcements for our participants. Just to frame our discussion today, we will spend the next 60 odd minutes in having a discussion around the world of caregivers and compassionate caring, specifically with regard to living wills and why is that important. There are 3 parts. One part is the presentation or the discussion, during which participants will listen and share their thoughts and questions on the chat box. You're requested to put as many questions that come to you. We will incorporate the questions as far as possible during the discussion. Subsequent to this, we will have an interactive question answer session where you can raise your hand and we will invite you to ask your questions. And finally, of course, we look forward to your feedback and suggestions. Request you to keep your microphone muted at all times and minimize background sounds. We are recording this webinar. Some sections of the panel discussion may be used for sharing later. However, no section of the participant interaction will be disclosed publicly. So please feel free to ask your questions which might seem personal or important. They will not be used anywhere. This is not an open program, and the idea is to have a safe conversation. We will refer to your questions for designing further programs that might be of relevance for people like you and others. So this is discussion time, and I think it might be worthwhile that we start with a poll. So I'm going to launch a couple of poll questions for the participants to input on. You will see a set of questions on your screen, and as you respond to them, you will also see who are the other participants and what is the constitution of the participant group here today. The most significant group right now seems to be like a well-wisher of a caregiver. And we have nearly 27 of the 36 participants who have responded.
Yeah.
Can you all see how the poll is looking like?
Yes.
So you're having 2 appointments for tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm delighted to actually see that a significant population of people or participants here are well-wishers of caregivers, because our research suggests that actually well-wishers of caregivers have a huge influence on caregivers and can play a very significant role in nudging caregivers to the kind of support that they may need. Caregivers usually are overwhelmed and do not have the bandwidth to procure information or have access to services that they may need. So I'm so glad to see so many well-wishers here, and also people who will be caregivers in the future or think that they might need caregivers. Dr. Roop and Dhwani, I hope you have a good sense of what our audience is looking like.
Yeah.
And we can have a conversation accordingly. Thank you very much for all of you who have participated. I'm going to end the poll for this now. All right.
I've just shared the results so that people can see.
Great.
Thank you. Okay.
Actually,
So-
will need a caregiver should be the first.
Yes, I think so. And with that, let's open the conversation, Dr. Roop. How would you like to take the conversation around living wills today?
Yeah. So I think we can start off by asking people how many of them know what a living will is, or how many have made a estate will, for instance. So
I'll request everybody who's actually made a will to raise their hand in the participant list. I think that's the
that
easiest way.
reactions, in the reactions at the bottom.
So use
I've
the
made-
reaction button at the bottom, and
If you made a estate will, just click that. You will see a upturned thumb. Put that up. I've done it for myself. There it is. Who else has it?
real estate will. I don't have much real estate, but I have a will.
So can we see the numbers?
Any sort of will, basically.
Yeah.
Any estate.
Any estate.
I'd like to leave my problems to someone, but that doesn't count. I think we have 3 or 4 people. 2, 3.
Okay.
Not too many.
Not many at all.
Not many at all. That's interesting.
So there's work for both Dhwani and me.
Yeah. Although I have no competence in drafting estate wills, but happy to refer you to anyone you might need.
Yes. So I suppose that, estate wills or legal wills are absolutely essential as well. And just for the sake of our audience, I'd like to also say that we are organizing one webinar around inheritance needs and how wills on real estate and other things can also be handled, problems included. So you could probably look out for that webinar and attend that session as well. So we will have a couple of experts, Rajat, who will be speaking to us on inheritance needs.
Okay, so how many people know the difference between a living will and an estate will? Again, if you do know, just put your thumb up.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Roop, we have a couple of the questions. Should I launch that poll as well?
Yeah, so
Sure.
while we are, Dhwani, you want to take that on first? I mean, we might as well begin by explaining that bit so that
Sure.
we are done with that while the poll runs.
Sure. So very simply, an estate will is of course a legal document that allows you to dispose of your property after your death. So it's something that comes into operation once you have passed away. Whereas a living will is a document that kicks into operation when you lose your ability to take decisions for yourself. And it is restricted to, and again, it is a legal document that allows you to express what treatment you do not wish to receive or what is the way in which you wish to be cared for in the future at a time when you might not be able to express your wishes yourself purely as a result of having lost your healthcare decision-making capacity. So very simply, that's the difference between the two.
Okay. So, right. So basically, a regular will comes in, kicks in when you are gone. The
Yes.
living will kicks in while you're still alive, and that's why it's a living will.
That's right.
Okay. So you had the poll.
Yes,
Can we-
we've launched a poll with 3 questions. One question, do you know about living wills?
Mhm.
The second question, is the living will legally executable in India? And the third question, do you need a lawyer to draw up a living will? And we have 28 of the 33 participants who have responded. I'm just going to keep it open for a bit so that some more may want to respond. Anish, can you share the responses? of the poll? Anish?
Okay. Right. While Anish
Yeah.
does that,
Yeah.
let's get started on the living will itself, and just to understand a few basics. You know, you think of. I mean, I'm giving you an analogy which might sound familiar, which I think should be familiar to most of us, and that is that look at a journey. You know, you're taking a trip to Goa. I remember when I was in my 20s, 30s, which was like a century ago, I think. Um, I could, well, hop into a bus with my friends, no concern about what the journey was going to be like, whether we would have clean loos on the way, food on the way or not. Land up there, decide where to stay, decide what we are doing. We were the only thing that we are certain about is that we knew when we had to come back to go back to work. Okay. Now at this stage in my life, no, that is not the way it works. I need my reservations to be made. I need the hotel to be made, all my research in place. I know what kind of quality of experience I'm going to get. And that I think should be mandatory for what will be the last journey in all our lives. And the last journey is the journey of sickness. Now, most of us have this fond thought that we are going to pass away one night and wake up in heaven the next morning. I know most people don't think that they'll go to hell, but most people think that they'll wake up listening to maybe either Bhimsen Joshi or Pink Floyd or whatever, suddenly one morning up there. That's not the way it's going to happen for most of us who are past 50. The statistics are pretty clear that sudden death, sudden unexpected death, is something that barely 7% of people are lucky enough to get once they've crossed the age of 50. So most of us will reach the last days after a certain period of time during which the journey will be more or less predictable. And I think since it is predictable, it's important on our part to, even if we can't make our reservations, at least to let people know what our preferences would be like, what your last days, the sickness experience will be like. Would you want your last days to be passed in hospital? Would you want them to be at home, in a specific home? Who you would want to take care of you? All those things, it would probably be good if we could put them down on in some form of record. Because if you don't, then the default option that comes up is from the medical system, and the default option of the medical system is to do everything. So everything typically means that that individual ends up in the ICU, and the ICU is not a very nice place. I don't know of any intensivist who wants to pass his own last days in his own ICU. No way. You're not fully conscious. There are tubes in all kinds of uncomfortable places. There are strange masked creatures doing all kinds of painful things to you. You're very likely to be confused and delirious. So think about it. You would not want to pass the last days in ICU. Yet people do think that, yeah, especially in some illnesses, they would want everything possible to be done. That is fair enough, but that has to be a considered decision. Almost when people are asked, almost 80 or 90%, at least 90% of doctors are clear that they don't like this term, everything should be done. So doctors are pretty clear about that. And yet, when you actually come to that stage, we find too often that families are confused, doctors are confused. Why? Because a person who should have been making those decisions is no longer able to make those decisions, or to spell them out, or even tell them what they had decided and maybe communicated, but not Well, but that information is not reaching across there where it should be. So the living will is something that it's a kind of a instrument that started off almost about more than 4 decades ago in the West, mainly in the US, and it evolved partly as it became, something that politicians also took interest in because their citizens, their voters wanted it. So it evolved, and in the US, it is now the most developed on how people take care of this. So you'll wonder, why is it that it's actually in some ways doing this is in some ways a kind of technology. It's a social technology, right? And then you wonder, when you look at any kind of medical technology, India has the latest medical technology. Within a year or so of its introduction or invention, it is here in India. It might be hugely expensive or whatever it is, but most of our top hospitals will have it. And how is it that the social technology never reached us? That's a question that we will probably discuss a little further along. But at the moment, let me stop at this point and hand it back to Bhavna. Yeah, Bhavna, you're muted.
One second. Yes, thank you. So I think you make a great point about the social technology and its difficulty to be, to be adopted in India. I think there is a significantly different social culture that we have, uh, whether it is about families or it is about individual, decisions and the roles of caregivers as well. I think they play into the fact that caregivers feel responsible for the person who is unwell or passing on, and don't want to be seen like they didn't do their darnest best. And what is the darnest best can always be questioned. And and I think that's the reason that we are having this conversation, because some of these conversations are difficult. What is your experience on this, Dr. Dhwani? What would you like to start this conversation with?
Sure. So perhaps I'd like to speak a little bit about why living wills can be a useful instrument when perhaps the medical culture hasn't caught up to the fact that doing the darndest and doing everything possible is always the right thing for, is always the right standard in medical care. Because what a living will does is it allows you to have expressed your wishes about all kinds of invasive treatment beforehand. So you can state in the living will that you don't want to be put on a ventilator, you don't want to be artificially fed, you don't want to be put on, an ECMO machine, you don't want to receive dialysis. You can make these desires of yours express and explicit, and this is ultimately a help both for your caregivers as well as for the doctors or the healthcare team that is looking after you, because it allows them to take, as in one, to take your values and preferences into account while determining what course of treatment they should be providing you. And second, it allows them to withhold or withdraw invasive, aggressive, life-sustaining treatment without feeling the weight of having taken that decision themselves. So the living will is essentially you're endorsing their, you're empowering them to be able to take these kinds of difficult decisions, which otherwise, might have required a lot more debate and discussion, and where the default might then have been simply to continue with invasive options. So very simply, a living will is a way of expressing your consent to medical treatment, just as it is for any other forms of medical treatment. So, you have to give your consent before someone can perform a surgery on you. The doctor must take your consent before, providing you any kind of intravenous drugs or, any other kind of invasive procedure. In the same way, at the end of your life, your consent must be taken before giving you this kind of, before subjecting you to life-sustaining treatment. And the living will is essentially a way of giving that consent in advance or refusing that consent in advance, as is more likely the case.
Right.
So in some sense, it's an expression of patient autonomy. Again, a concept that perhaps has its roots initially in the West, but is also very much a part of our legal culture in India now. That, you know, you give the patient the right to self-determination, and more importantly in this context, the right to have a dignified death.
So sorry, we were having a little technical glitch, and which has now been sorted. And I thought it might be a good point for us to share the results of the poll that we conducted of the 3 questions. So on your screens right now, you will see how this particular audience has responded to knowing about living wills. There's a significant section that knows. And there is a view about whether or not it is legally executable,
Sure.
and whether or not a lawyer is required.
Sure.
So can I suggest that both Dhwani and I state our positions? They're largely overlapping on the second and third questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So is the living will legally executable in India? Now, you know, that actually takes me back to the point I was talking about earliest, in which Dhani also alluded to. When somebody is in that last stage, and when these decisions, difficult decisions, are being made, what is the most important part for a family? It is knowing what the individual wanted. It's not a piece of paper, it's that knowledge. And that knowledge depends on conversations, right? It's knowledge, conversations, preferably a clear delegation from that individual saying that I want so and so to be the person taking care of me, so that within the family also there's no dissension when it comes to that kind of a stage. So if you look at these things, these are in 90% of families. I think this is something that can be sorted out just by, we are not like the West. Here, provided these conversations are held, then families will most likely follow those instructions, but those instructions have to be given. And legally executable in India, you know, I think one of the reasons why we are here today, and one of the reasons why we are talking about this, is that the culture of making this possible, of making it legally what do you mean by legally executable? It means that if I have a living will, then if whoever it is takes that document across to the hospital when I am in that stage, that document will be respected. Okay,
That's right.
if it is not respected, then the law will have a position in saying, in asking why it was not respected. So I'm going to put it to Dhwani now to take this forward.
Sure. I mean, that's exactly right. As in, having a legally valid document is that document having the force of, you know, creating obligations for other people. And a living will essentially creates obligations for your caregivers. I mean, if you are a person who is nominated under that will to take a decision on someone else's behalf, and it creates an obligation for your treating team. So for a long time, advance directives also, I mean, or living wills were not recognized as legally valid documents in India. So they were, this changed only in 2018 with a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court of India, where the court, for one and most importantly, recognized that it's legally valid to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatment. So it's not a crime to take someone off the ventilator, and it is, and the court recognized that doing that this kind of withholding or withdrawing can often be in the best interests of a patient. So it is not always incumbent upon a doctor to do everything possible to save someone's life, and saving someone's life at the expense of their quality of life might not actually be in their best interests. So one, very importantly, it allowed doctors to take decisions to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatments. The second is that it recognized advance medical directives or living wills as legally valid documents. So you can now, and specifically it stated that such documents are a way of exercising the autonomy of a patient, respecting their right to privacy and ensuring that they are able to die a dignified death. Now, what does this mean in practice? The court actually laid down, that means that anyone and everyone can today, in theory, create a living will, which, as Dr. Roop said, will create some obligations for your treating team. So where at the point at which you lose your healthcare decision-making capacity, someone whom you have told, you might have talked to someone about your living will and executed one, that person can go to your treating team, show them this document and say, well, this is what this person desired. So let's respect this and give effect to this. Now, there is a process that the court has laid down for creating a living will. And I'm happy to discuss that whenever you think is appropriate, Bhavna. But essentially, it very briefly, a living will is something that can be executed by any adult, so anyone of the age of 18 and above, someone who is of sound mind, so who is able to understand and grasp the information that's being provided to them and take an informed decision about the kind of treatment they might not wish to receive or the end of life care that they might want in the future, and to put down those wishes on paper. Now, there are again two aspects to what the Supreme Court has said about living wills. One is what the content of this will should be, and the second is the process of actually executing it. So the content is essentially, stating very clearly and explicitly what is the kind of treatment that you don't wish to receive at a time in the future when you might have lost your decision-making capacity. And most importantly, the court has also asked that you nominate someone as your, you could call them your surrogate decision maker or someone who has a healthcare power of attorney on your behalf. You nominate someone who at that time is empowered by you to take decisions, to take those treatment decisions on your behalf in consultation with your treating team. So someone who you trust, who knows your values and preferences, who would be able to say that, oh, okay, I know that this person wouldn't have wanted to be hooked up to a ventilator for, endlessly. So I can speak on their behalf and request the treating team to take this into consideration. So that is as far as the content of the will goes. And the process is that it should be signed preferably in the presence of two independent witnesses. And currently the legal requirement is that it also be countersigned by someone known as the judicial magistrate of the first class. That is somewhat of a tedious procedure. In some cases, people have successfully been able to go to a judicial magistrate.
Impediment.
It's a huge impediment, agreed, yeah. Rather than, it's not just tedious, it's actually quite a bit of a roadblock. And I can speak personally from my experience as well. My 85-year-old grandmother and 75-year-old aunt wanted to drew up a living will after the Supreme Court judgment and went to a judicial magistrate court in Dadar, and were told that the magistrate didn't have any information about this. They had no idea what a living will was, hadn't received any instructions that they was authorized to countersign a document like this. And so my relatives had to go back empty-handed with just this document in place. There are examples of other people who have managed to execute them, but they tend to be people who have a more intimate knowledge of the legal system. So they're either
lawyers
themselves or people who know lawyers better. So that's proved to be a bit of a challenge, but that shouldn't be any reason not to draw up a living will. Because even if you haven't managed to execute it in the manner that the court has required, actually writing down your values and preferences on a piece of paper, appointing someone, and preferably, and as a must, having a conversation with your near relatives or near ones or whoever it is that you trust about about the contents of that living will is in itself an important way of making sure that the people around you know what you want and know what your wishes might be towards the end of life. So I wouldn't let this procedural requirement deter anyone from actually drawing up a living will themselves. And perhaps Bhavna, you can share some of the formats that the Elicit team has drawn up and which are currently which are currently available on a couple of websites including Vithi. So we'd be happy to share those as well.
100%. One of the resources that we will share with not just participants here, but all the people that we interact with is the process and the resources that Vidhi or Elicit have made available, and people can go through those. But I was reminded of a conversation that I was having with my husband a couple of days ago and said that, I'd like to talk to you about some of these things. And despite being in this space, despite, knowing and having this language so easy, he looked at me and said, I don't want to have this conversation right now. And, why are we having this conversation? So I do think that this is a tricky conversation for somebody who is seemingly well, and it gets trickier when it becomes somebody who is unwell. And we do know that when a caregiver has the moral responsibility of looking after an unwell person, then bringing up the point of a living will can be like referencing that person's death. And
So,
Dr. Roop, you have a view about that, I
yeah.
know.
So I think, this is something that we need to really get out of the way. And I agree. I'm not obviously privy to the conversation you had with your husband, but you could start off by saying, I need your help with something, or refer to somebody who passed away at home. I mean, one of your family members, you remember how that person passed away? Don't you remember? It was such a terrible time. And I was thinking about what happened at that time, and it made me realize.
Hmm.
And I know I'm okay right now, but I'm a little worried about this, and I want to be prepared.
Yeah.
Or I've just been thinking about what the end of my life will be like. And are you okay hearing my answers? What I would want? So I'm not sure that
I'd like
Bhavna is the right person to be. But these are all conversation starters, and we need to have these conversation starters in our mind, because there will be a moment at home, at dinner, at somewhere where this balloon floats up, and you must catch it at that moment.
yeah.
You have to be ready to put the pin in and explode that conversation open. So anybody who's interested, keep this ready.
No, I think it's an important one. I'm also reminded that when it came about my conversation, right? And Dhwani, I'd like you to come in on this as well, which is that when it was about me having the conversation about how I wanted to be treated, and I didn't wish to be in very invasive, just kept alive for the sake of alive, it was a lot easier for me to have that conversation with my husband. But when my mother wanted to have the same conversation with me, it's the same conversation. I'm the same person. And it was so much harder. It was like, ting, like one moment happened at that time. And I was like, okay, now I have to have this conversation with my mother. And it's not so easy. So I'd like to bring that to the fore, that we could be on either side of this conversation. And it is not an easy conversation. But as a caregiver, I can probably start from maybe thinking about it for myself. before I go to the person that I am looking after. And then, so how do you initiate this conversation, Dr. Dhwani?
I don't, I'm not sure. I mean, this kind of conversation really differs from family to family and even within families. As in, I don't shy away from something like this at all, and my younger sister can't bear it when I bring topics like this up. So, you know, yeah, if there's anyone I know my parents are going to want to nominate as their healthcare proxy, it's going to be me and not her. Because I mean, I'm happy to, and I'd say the one thing to think about if you know you're hesitating to have conversations like this is to try and imagine what the scenario is going to be like if you didn't have this conversation and you were in hospital, were in an ICU, and you were put on the spot and had to make a decision, and you were faced with the knowledge that you actually don't know what your parent or your grandparent wanted at that time. So I and those kinds of as in, I mean, I know it's not easy to think about a hypothetical situation like that, but and I'm sure again Dr. Roop can tell you a little more about how things work like this in the ICU. But you know, it's far better to have had a conversation at a time where you are not, you know, you're not stressed. You have the time and the luxury to discuss these values and preferences. There are no, you know, there aren't 100 machines whirring and beeping around you. Uh, and you can be secure in the knowledge that you know, this conversation can keep evolving. Isn't this can just be the starter. You know, people can change their minds. You can go back and revisit these decisions, but unless you begin this conversation, you might then one day face a scenario where you know, you will not have the satisfaction of knowing that you did what was in the best interests of your loved ones.
Or
So
what they
I'd
wanted.
say, yeah, or what they wanted.
We have a couple of questions around what the living will is, and I thought it might be a good idea to incorporate that in our conversation. So, which is that, you know, is the living will only about the curative procedures, for example, or where would I like to be? For example, would I like to be at a home, or is it okay that I be in a nursing home? Because I don't think there are clear or they are like straitjacket answers for this either way. Some people may want to be in their home, and there might be others who may wish to be in a nursing home for that matter. What is your experience on this?
Uh,
So, Dhwani, you want to answer this? Or?
no, I was just going to say that, you know, I'll give the answer from a very purely legal perspective, as in the court itself, when it was you know, talking about living wills, has restricted the scope of living wills to medical treatment. But that doesn't mean that you are prohibited from writing about your other values and preferences about end of life care in a living will. In fact, it's absolutely, I mean, I think it should be encouraged that you do. The court obviously approaches it from that kind of perspective because it's looking at what are the obligations that a document like a living will can create. So that, you know, in that sense, writing about refusing curative treatment has a clear obligation that it imposes on your treating team. But a living will is also more than that, right? It's an expression of how you wish to spend your days or last few hours, and it is a document that can serve as a guide to your caregivers in addition to your medical doctors, and therefore it's absolutely I mean, I think it would be a very good practice if you expressed what those other wishes were in a living will as well.
So the living will that we have, the one that we put up, and I suggest anybody who wants can pull that down and read it through. Because of the stage we are in India, because we didn't want to make it too complex, we said that this should be, I mean, this one refers to people who have reached terminal illness, have a disease from which there is no reasonable expectation of recovering, or are in a coma with no expectation of regaining consciousness. Then it was basically for withdrawing various kinds of things. I mean, we listed IV fluids and treatments, including antibiotics, artificial feeding also by, say, something like a tube that goes into the dialysis, ventilator, chemotherapy, and something that we call cardiopulmonary resuscitation, where when the heart stops, then I don't know if you ever seen it in a hospital, but you may have seen it on TV, where people kind of pump and thump the chest and try and restart the heart and breathing. Now, on TV, it looks like it happens very well and smoothly, but from life, we know that in hospitals, less than 5% of people who end up with that situation actually survive or recover well. So all these things, you can actually say, I do not want. And our living will, because of the way the situation that we are as Indians in right now, we said that this living will, when it comes to that point, should be certified by 3 doctors, my regular doctor plus another 2 who say that yes, this situation has arisen, and these were his wishes or her wishes, and this is what we will follow. And that is one component. So the component of the journey, how do I want my journey to be? But together with that journey, how I want my journey to be, it's also extremely important to appoint a conductor. Because putting this kind of a document, there are lots of things that need discretion, that need another human to actually think about and say, is this correct? ये कर सकते हैं, नहीं कर सकते हैं. And for that, you need to appoint a healthcare power of attorney or a healthcare proxy. There are different terms for it. So the living will has 2 components. One is the wishes, and the second is the appointment. And both of these are equally important. And when you appoint a proxy, please remember that the proxy is not a committee. It's not 3 people taking a decision together. You may appoint 3 people, but they are in sequence. If 1 is not available, then 2 takes over. If 2 is not available, 3 takes over. It's not 1 plus 2 plus 3 voting together. No, that is the surest guarantee for confusion.
Indecision.
So if you put these 2 elements in place, you're done. Now, you asked about place and so on. Now, our basic living will, the one that we have created, is for India's situation at this stage. So it is in that sense a little basic. It's a basic living will. But if you want a more elaborate version, there's something called 5 wishes. Just look it up. www.5wishes.com or .org. If you look it up, that has all these other things. And as I said, when you look at that last journey, you're not looking at the arrival stage. You're looking at the whole journey. So the 5 wishes document allows you to do that. Even in our document, there is enough blank space. You can actually write those things down. So if those things are written down, yeah, it becomes easier for people to know. Right.
So here's the thing, while Dr. Dhwani spoke about, anybody over the age of 18 can have a will or a living will. And, there is always this question as to what is the right time to have a will. I can speak for myself. I'm 46, fairly okay health-wise. But, is it okay that I should be talking about a living will or writing a living will at this stage? Or should I think about it only when I have been, there has been a prognosis or a diagnosis, or, there is something that is, that's impending, that when I start thinking about this.
So Yamdut has arrived and he has given you a signal in the distance. Ki aa raha hu. Is that what you mean?
You know that, right?
No, I don't agree. One of the things is that everybody has a different perception. I mean, I'm presuming that everybody who's here is concerned about this. Okay. Now, all of us many of us do put out this organ donation, corneal donation, organ donation documents. Now, they're not going to take your organs when you're alive, are they? So obviously that's something that applies afterwards. Now, if you think about all these things, they happen to healthy people who suddenly are either hit by a truck or a clot or a bullet or whatever. I mean, it could be anything. So for all of us, I mean, at whatever age, as soon as you become an adult, that risk is there. Now, if it's something that bothers you, if it is something that bothers you, that if I get a brain injury, because I'm a neurologist, and this really applies to brain injury. If I get a brain injury, I do not want to spend the rest of my life being dependent, whatever. So for younger people or healthy people, the only thing that you need to think about is the remote chance of a bad brain injury. And that is the situation that you need to think and cover. If you are happy, if you're okay with letting whatever is to happen, fine. But if you are somebody like me who is very clear that if I can't be here speaking to you guys, then I don't want to be around. Then I need to make that clear. So, Bhavna, you need to make it tomorrow. I mean, and please.
I've already made it.
Yes.
And it's thanks to Dr. Roop's talks about, and I think exactly like him, as in that's the kind of scenario I wouldn't want to be in. And if I have to, if that's a possibility with that kind of catastrophic brain injury, then it doesn't matter whether I'm 18 or 30 or 50. I want to make sure that I have my wishes set down in writing.
I like the association and the connection with organ donation. And I think that personally for me, that has been a very powerful experience. And I think the way that I'd like to feel meaningful is that if nothing else, if I have some organs that I can give to somebody else who can lead a full life, then I'd rather go down that path than be constrained. And I think that these are difficult, very, very difficult conversations. And I know this from the loss of both my father and my grandmother. So when my dad passed away, we were too much in shock for us to be able to take decisions around organ donation. But my grandmother had that conversation with me about her eyes being donated. And although she was in her 80s, we were able to donate her eyes. And it is such a gratifying thing to have fulfilled her wishes and to have known that with today's technology, for example, eyes of one person can actually benefit 8 to 10 people, because only a portion of the cornea.
Yeah.
First? Yeah. I'm very wary of medical terms because I'm so bad at them. But that said, what would be your advice in terms of what are some of the steps that a person who is keen on writing a living will can take? So how would you go about it, Dr. Dhwani?
Personally, I'd like to have a conversation with a doctor initially to understand what are the kinds of treatment that I might be subjected to in the event of terminal illness, dementia, or as Dr. Roop said, if I were to have a catastrophic brain injury, and what would my probable prognosis or quality of life be at that time. So at least I need to have the information first to understand what kind of medical treatment I might be subjected to before I can decide whether that is something that might be acceptable to me or not. So perhaps I might have a conversation with a family physician or any other doctor I might be familiar with.
Can I come in at this point?
Yeah.
So in those countries where the living wills are fairly standardized and across the board, we've realized that because I'm part of something called Advanced Care Planning International. It's an international organization. One of the things we've realized is that doctors are bad people to have this conversation. They're too busy. Half the times now in India, 99% of the time they are themselves unaware of what is going on. So ideally, these people, the people who hold these conversations are advanced care planning facilitators. In Australia, across the country, they hold camps to train facilitators for advanced care planning. So you take on this responsibility, you hear all the details of all of this, and you become the facilitator in your samaj or your local club or whatever it is, and then you kind of take this conversation forward. So that's something that we are looking at setting up sometime soon. But it obviously needs resources and a fair amount of organization push. But it's something that all of you who have been hearing us today, you are effectively on the first step to becoming facilitators.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think having a normal conversations around subject like this, like an everyday conversation, like it's not an event, is perhaps a good thing to start with. Coming back to what could be the next step, so you have a conversation with the doctor and you understand what
Sure.
would you do next.
I mean, and then have a conversation with your family, or if not them, then with any other near friend or next of kin, and discuss your wishes and preferences with them. I mean, if you should be nominating someone as a healthcare power of attorney in your living will. So speak to that person and let them know that that's what you're planning, and let your wishes be known to them. And then third, begin the process of drawing it up. As Dr. Roop said, there are already lots of resources that you can refer to draft something like this. And you should feel free to use the many different kinds of templates that already exist. And having made one, and I've already spoken.
There is no official version.
That's
Please
right.
understand,
That's right.
there is no official version.
That's right. And once you've made one, I've already spoken about the process. I think Dr. Nagesh Simha has also mentioned in the chat that you can have a look at how advanced directives are framed under the Mental Health Act as well. So that's an act that specifically allows you to frame advanced directives to make decisions about the treatment you receive for various kinds of mental illness. So that's another possibility. And once you've made it, to make people aware that you've made it, so that whether it's telling your family doctor about it, or telling the people who you've appointed as powers of attorney under it, or telling your other family members about it. I think that's an important step as well, so that at the time when should something like this arise, you're able to, people are aware that that's a document that you've made, and will look for it and give effect to your wishes.
So while, I think that there's another point, which is that should it be a family member or could it be anybody else? But I think that's a little tricky, because it is quite possible that some of the hospitals, if you happen to be in that place, will tend to look for the next of kin, unless it is specifically articulated. So what is that thing about, who should be the healthcare proxy for you?
That's actually a very important point that you brought up, Bhavna. And I think for people, I mean, we have to understand that even in India, so many people have children living abroad.
Yeah.
So they don't have anybody here.
Yes.
Then one of the couple passes away and the other person is left alone. Or even people in the LGBTQ community. I mean, estranged from family, living alone. So it becomes important to identify and designate somebody to take that responsibility and basically to speak for you.
Yes.
Now, the important thing is, it could be family members also. The most important is that person comfortable, okay, making those decisions on your behalf? Even if their wishes, it might be somebody who loves you so much and says, I will not be able to make this decision.
Yeah.
Then that's important you have to make sure that their emotional connection to you would not get in the way. So, so somebody has said that it looks like something like a Goldilocks thing. When you ask somebody, will they do this? And somebody says, no, I will never be able to let you go. I will sit with you even if it is for 20 years. That's a little too warm. And somebody will say, yes, if you've written that, I will sign it immediately. That's a little cold. You want somebody in between who says, we will talk about this. I will try and understand what you want, and I will try my best to follow it.
Exactly.
So you have to identify those people. That is number one. Then you take number two, number three, but it absolutely does not need to be a family member,
That's right.
right? Uh, 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 Specifically, a spouse might find it very difficult to take this kind of a decision.
But don't you anticipate there can be a conflict? So, for example, if there is a decision to be taken and, actually I have appointed, let's say, somebody else, but won't the hospital want to go to the next of kin, which might be my husband, then there might be conflict.
Dhwani, you want to answer
Yeah, no, I mean, if you've specifically appointed someone as your healthcare, as your surrogate decision maker, or given them a healthcare power of attorney in your living will, then that's the person who the treating team should be going to. Because and you have to see it not as a conflict. It's essentially an extension of the patient's wishes themselves.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of the surrogate versus the husband. It's a question of the patient's wishes themselves being carried forward. So that kind of conflict shouldn't arise, because the person appointed under your living will should have priority.
I have another question from the.
But I think again, it's important to touch on a point that Dr. Nagesh has raised, because in theory, it might be fine to say that, legally the person to go to is is the person you've appointed as the surrogate decision maker. In practice, if there really is a conflict like this, and there are strong opposing views from, your close family members, then for the treating team itself, it's perhaps best practice for them to try and involve people in a process of shared decision making, and explain to them the reasons, try and tell them why this is the kind of course of action that's being taken, and bring them on board with the decision rather than overriding them based on some legal technicality.
And I think Dr. Nagesh makes another great point in the chat box, which says that the loved ones can be caught with guilt and, with social pressure of how will I be seen if I gave up on my loved one or something like that. Those things come into play as far as caregivers are concerned. And they may need counseling or support or guidance from the treating team to be able to do this. A large number of caregivers, for example, are also parents who are looking after children with life-limiting conditions, etc. So, what about those caregivers and them looking at their living wills in order to address their anxieties? I suppose, what do you do? How do you make sure that even if I have written this, it will be executed? What can be done? Can there be a couple of things?
Dhwani, you want to?
No, so sorry. This is specifically in relation to the children who are caregivers of parents. Was that your question?
The other way around.
Oh,
Parents
yeah.
or children with either special needs or life-limiting needs, etc.,
Yeah.
often live with the anxiety of what after me.
Right.
And I'm the only provider support system. So, what if something were to happen to me?
Yeah.
Who will take care of them?
Yeah.
That is.
I mean, that again, this is, I suppose, I'm not sure whether this is from the perspective of sort of end of life care, or from broadly looking at the guardianship of children like this, because actually that is quite at least the law on it is a bit tricky and murky, as in we don't have enough, we don't have proper guardianship provisions in our law that allow people to be appointed as guardians of adults, to be honest. Except for some provisions under this, for people with autism and cerebral palsy under this Rehabilitation Council Act. So maybe this is a question for, this is a topic for another time, because I think it's not specifically linked to end of life care. But the short answer is that it's a bit hard, as in there's no specific legal process in place to ensure that you have a guardian for a child who might be living with disabilities. And the only way to address this currently is to approach the court and have a guardian appointed, or basically have the court act in the best interests of a person like this, should the
Maybe we
parents
can
not
pick it up for another conversation, like
Sure.
you rightly pointed out, because
Yeah.
I think there are some other provisions like trusts, etc.,
Yeah,
that can
yeah.
be executed. A couple of questions, like, for example, I'm 62 years old and I recently had a mild heart attack, after which the cardiologist did an angioplasty. I seem to have recovered, right? And then do I need to make a living will? Dr. Roop?
Yeah, so that actually is a continuation of that first question when you kind of brought yourself up as a subject, Bhavna, and said, "Do I need to make a living?"
Yeah,
So it's actually, if there is a time,
yeah.
if there is a time, then the time is when a medical diagnosis is made of any kind.
Mm.
Because once you had a heart attack, then subsequent heart attacks are possible. I mean, nobody can guarantee that you will not get one. Or if your heart arteries are abnormal, then your brain arteries are also likely to be abnormal, and so on. And frankly, it's a sign that the organism is now beginning to, uh, well, uh,
Transition.
yeah, the expiry dates are now coming up. So,
Make a
so
transition. Let's just say that.
so I think it is important that you take that as an occasion to
What
reflect
if my
on.
doctor doesn't believe in making a living will, and he says that, listen, I'm the medical expert and I'm the one in charge here. What do I do then?
Okay, so if you have made a living will, and this is really important if you have a bad diagnosis like cancer,
Mm,
and you made a living will and you know that this is something that is going to come up,
yeah.
take the living will along, show it to your doctor. If the doctor says no, I'll put it in the rubbish bin, put that doctor in the rubbish bin. I'm as frank as that. Then you need to look for a doctor who will take care of you in your last days, respecting your choices and wishes.
Mm,
Once that doctor accepts, yes, I will respect your choices, then you need to ask that doctor to confirm that the hospital that you expect to be taken care of towards the end will also accept that.
mm,
Because we are at a stage in India where these things are not yet defined.
yeah.
So anybody who starts to go down this path, I'm a doctor, so I know that there are enough of my colleagues around who will stand by this, even if there is any confusion. It's easier for me. But if you are not a doctor, or if you don't have a doctor in your family who can stand there,
Mm,
then this document becomes important, and you need to be certain that your doctor will follow this document. So it's important. I mean, for all of you who are listening in here, if you do make this living will, I strongly suggest you will do us a service if you take that living will and show it to your doctor, because your doctors will at least start becoming aware of what this is.
mm. There is also another term called a DNAR. What's a DNAR, and how is that different or similar? Or
Okay, I'll take that, Dhwani.
Sure.
Okay, so for a long time, you see, when I trained, we kind of grew up with this knowledge that if somebody passed away, if somebody's heart stopped in front of us, then we had to go through the motions of restarting their heart and doing whatever it took, uh, until it became, and you, if you did that, there were times when it was completely futile, when the person was already dying, and doing all that had no effect. I mean, in fact, you traumatized. You made the last moments painful for somebody. So, but this was a kind of a unwritten rule for Indian doctors that if you don't do this, somebody will come and sue you. So now, just about a few months ago, and this was something that Dhwani and I were part of, the Indian Council of Medical Research put out guidelines on that, which said no doctor needs to do that. Instead, you need to find out in advance if somebody is in that kind of a state where their heart is likely to stop, then are their wishes such that they would want to be permitted to pass on in peace?
Mm, mm,
And if either the patient or the patient's caregiver or the surrogate say that, yes, that is what we want to, then you have to respect that.
mm,
And once that document is prepared and kept ready, then any doctor who sees it has to obey that order. Now, there are colleagues of mine who say, this is not a law, this is just a guideline, but and you may be even hearing that around. But what we've realized is that if a medical body puts out a guideline which is very clear cut, then courts are going to follow that. So it is now effectively like a law that if you say that in my last moments, let me pass away in peace with a natural death, you have the absolute right to put that down.
I think this is where that whole social technology piece that we started off this conversation with is important. I mean, actually, traditionally speaking, I mean, I know that, like, I keep bringing up my grandmother because that's an experience that I have, but she had this very strong view of how I want to die. And, you know, there was this whole thing around my last moments should be like this. And she had a certain method to her way of dying. And I think um, she wanted to always have that conversation. But over the years, I think, although traditionally in our faith and in our social systems, dying was a natural part of every home, and it is still, but it is not a part of conversation. But it seems to have faded away because everywhere, you know, everyone is talking about longevity and not talking about dying, etc. Somewhere we have to bring back these conversations and saying, so how do I really want to pass on? Because if there is one thing that is guaranteed for us, it is perhaps this, nothing else. And I think that social technology piece that you mentioned, Dr. Roop, in the beginning,
Yeah.
is about bringing back the conversation around death and dying, and that it is natural, and that I'd like to have a say in how I want to die. Um, are there any tricky examples in your experience that you would like to highlight here, that you have seen, that one can learn from?
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, the most tricky examples are when the family is in discord.
Mm,
Where one member says, this is what it is, the other one says, no, this is not the way it is. Um, I think that is when doctors find it difficult to handle. And there are times, I mean, you can't deny this, that there are times when we ourselves as medical practitioners really are not very sure. Have we reached the point where nothing more can be done?
mm,
Is there something more that I can try out? I mean, the one that I remember was quite some time ago, but I still remember it. It was a young man,
mm,
and uh, yeah, it was a patient that you know, I had become a friend of. I mean, for me, it became very difficult towards the end
mm,
when uh, his father was very clear. He said, "Now it's this is it. Let him be."
mm.
His mother did not want to, and I was torn professionally and personally.
I can imagine
So those situations, yeah, they do arise, but I think that with experience, I think, well, this was some years ago, so I think maybe now I would also be a little better at handling this.
that. Yeah.
But these situations, I mean, that's part of that is what makes being a doctor so fulfilling also.
I can imagine that. I was just, I don't know, for some reason, what flashed in front of my eyes was, you know, we have these uh, films and serials that kind of mess around with us as well, right? So they leave you with this idea that, you know, there might be hope at the end of some very long period, and you do want to hold on to hope. I think that it is only natural that you do have these visions of, okay, there was a period of illness, but you came around it. And it is a tough choice. I mean, why, you know, so maybe just holding it in balance. Dr. Dhwani, do you have any tricky incident that you'd like to share? And in the meanwhile, I will ask the audience to put in any questions, although they have been putting in. But if they have any specific questions that we can take up or we may have missed.
I have been answering some as it goes along.
Yeah,
So,
same here.
yeah.
No, I mean, I again, honestly, I don't have any, apart from my own personal experience in having these conversations with my family members, I haven't had the opportunity to deal with tricky situations like this. I mean, I don't know, you just mentioned TV shows and serials. I mean, I actually use that sometimes, have used that as a conversation starter with the family. So, you know, you watch someone hooked up on a machine on a, you know, on while watching Grey's Anatomy, and I turn around and tell my mother that, you know, please make sure that, I mean, I don't want that, I don't know about you, so tell me right now. And that's the way I've had this kind of conversation with them.
Nice.
Honestly, the tricky situations have only been when Dr. Nagesh and Dr. Roop and I have gone around talking to doctors about this, because convincing them about what the right thing to do and helping them sort through the legal tangle in their head has been far more tricky than convincing caregivers and patients themselves about the importance of an issue like this.
Dhwani, that was so well said. The legal tangle inside doctors' heads.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the quote from today's session. And well, I do think that, you know, there is a little bit of the society and the way that we put doctors on a pedestal and make them representatives of gods, that is a little responsible for this. I do think that we need to take the control for our lives back into our hands and say that I am the master of my destiny and that I wish to lead my life the way that, or the end of my life the way that I wish to lead it. So, you know, a doctor may be able to save me, but I will have the final say.
So, if I can leave with one last statement for everybody,
Yes, please.
whether it's a living will or even an estate will, but definitely a living will, it is always too early until it is too late.
Oof,
Right.
yes. Any closing remarks from you, Dhwani?
No, nothing except that we are here. If anyone needs help in, you know, thinking about how to draw up a living will, I know you've already said that caregiver Sathi will be happy to help, and so are all of us to help people think through some of these difficult issues.
Yes, absolutely. So we will be, I mean, Caregiver Sathi will just be a conduit because, you know, frankly, that's what we wish to be. And we will help people work with professionals and experts so that, you know, we can create more awareness and reach this to a greater set of people. Um, I'd like for the audience to put in any comments that they may have. Could you please use the chat box to give us feedback about how you think this session went for you? I am also going to start a poll which will be about rating the webinar. So if you can give us that feedback, that will be useful. Please use the chat box to also let us know if you would like any specific topics to be picked up again, and we'd like to take them as well. In the meanwhile, while this is on, I'd like to thank Dr. Dhwani as well as Dr. Roop for your taking the time this evening and spending it with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, our pleasure.
Thank you.
And I am trying to see. So we have about 17 people who have responded.
Okay.
All right, there are some interesting comments there. You may want to have a look at those.
Sure.
So if there's anybody who would like to specifically ask a question and want to raise your hand, then this is the time. Would anybody like to interact and ask a question? Going one. Going two. This is an opportunity. All right. I'm going to create another opportunity, which is that you have a chance to write into us. Okay, Sanjeev. Sanjeev has a question. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. Sanjeev, would you like to unmute your end?
Okay, yeah, hello.
Yes, Sanjeev.
Okay, I have a question which concerns the fact that my mother made an estate will when she was, astute and so on. Since then, she has been diagnosed with dementia. So is there any way that a living will can be made? Is my question.
How that, so there are two parts to it. And Dhwani will answer the other part of it, the mechanism. It really depends on the stage of her dementia. So if she is at the stage where little difficult to make a clinical judgment, but if she's at the stage where she can still make broad decisions about her day-to-day life, then this is a conversation that can be had with her, and she can take these decisions. And ideally, if that living will is made, then a doctor has to certify that she has the decision-making capacity.
Yeah.
Okay, so a doctor actually has to assess that and specify that. And that is, again, as I said, something that most Indian doctors are not very familiar with.
But she's not in a position to think really very.
No, then she won't be in a position to draw up a valid living will.
But you could elicit her wishes. I mean,
Yeah.
in conversation as a family, you can elicit her wishes. And if this conversation is held, I mean, if you elicit her wishes and if the family is in broad agreement on what those wishes are, then that's it. Because in any case, it will be the family who will make the decisions for her towards the end.
Yeah.
She's got dementia.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
There is a question about, yeah. I'm glad you responded, Dhwani. Thank you very
No
much.
problem.
Yes. Anyone else would like to ask a question? So I think we are 5 minutes over our committed time, and thank you very much for all of you who made the time and effort to be here and participated in this discussion. These are difficult conversations. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Dhwani as well as Dr. Roop. I'm glad that we have initiated this conversation, and we will be hopefully able to address some of the questions. Those who may have further questions can reach out. But hopefully over a period of time, some of these tricky conversations will become easy conversations.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.